Mr. Chancellor, Mr. President and Vice Chancellor, Mr. Founding President, fellow graduates, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs. I'm deeply touched, obviously, by the honor that I've just received from the university where I began my professional career 47 years ago. I'm especially touched to be presented for the honor by my old and dear friend John Wadland, and to have my other old friend, the founding president, here present also. I thank the Senate of Trent University for this great honor. My life since 1965, as John implied, has taken a rather different course than I then anticipated. In thinking back upon it, I'm reminded of something that Robertson Davies once said about life. He said, "I kept trying to be a playwright, but life kept trying to make me a novelist." And eventually, you have to turn your head and listen to what life is trying to tell you about yourself. Well, I kept trying to be a historian. I still do, and I still am. But life, it seems, has also been trying to make me a public servant and a writer and teacher in the field of public administration. And so I'd like to draw on my own experience to express the hope that whatever life holds for you, my new fellow Trent graduates, a portion of your lives may be devoted to some kind or kinds of public service. I hope that at least some of you may choose, for example, to become professional public servants at the municipal, provincial, or federal level. My own life taught me how rewarding it can be to contribute to the public good in that special way. But public service takes many forms. Most people do it in other ways. As members of a political party or as elected politicians, still one of the noblest ways to serve the good. Or as employees, leaders, or supporters of non-governmental organizations, or as leaders and volunteers in a host of charitable, religious, or community organizations. You don't have to be a public servant to give yourself to public service. The best example of that I can offer you is Trent's own founding president. He was never employed, as far as I know, as a professional public servant, but he has given his country a lifetime of public service. Tom Simon's marvelous example reminds us that public service, properly conceived, is inseparable from good citizenship. And citizens, my fellow graduates, are what you have been preparing yourselves at Trent University to become. You are now graduates of one of Canada's great small universities, devoted above all to what were traditionally called the liberal arts and sciences. But what does liberal mean in this academic context? The word liberal is a very old word going back to ancient Greece, where it described the qualities of a free man. Liber, free, i.e., not a slave, and therefore a citizen, a voting member of the polis, the civic democracy. Later, in the new universities of medieval Europe, where universities were invented, the word liberal also came to be used by extension to designate the studies befitting this kind of free person or citizen. Studies of the kind you've been pursuing here at Trent are those that prepare you for citizenship. They are the studies that, as Northrop Frye, the great Canadian writer and literary critic, put it, set one free. So the kind of university education to which your new Trent degrees attest is closely connected to the ideas of freedom and citizenship. And it may be worth reflecting on how they're connected. A citizen is a bearer of rights and duties in a framework of democratic community. And all three of those, rights, duties, community, are important, and they're connected. Without a democratic community, there can be no rights and freedoms. Rights and freedoms are created and conferred and can only be enjoyed within a specific democratic community. But without duties, there can be no community. It's our duties, our sense of mutual obligation concretely expressed in public-spirited actions, that create, nourish, and sustain our communities. So it's actually the duties that come first. We now have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, but it really ought to have been preceded by a Charter of Democratic and Community Duties. Because without the duties conscientiously observed, we will not have or will lose our communities. And without a sustaining sense of community, we will in time lose our rights also. I underline this risk because all Western democracies have been experiencing a gradual decline in community involvement for the last 50 years. Scholars who study this trend measure what they call civic engagement and social capital. What these capture is the degree to which individual citizens are willing to involve themselves in community activities outside the home. From the last decades of the 19th century to the middle of the 20th century, those measures were all on the rise. They reached their peak about 1961, the year I graduated from high school and entered university. But ever since that fateful year, the indicators of civic engagement and social capital have been on the decline. Every year since then, citizens of all Western societies have shown less and less willingness to involve themselves in community activities of all kinds. And this decline in social capital has spawned a parallel decline in political engagement, including, unfortunately, a steady decline in voter turnout in almost all Western democracies. This is the world that you've inherited, and it's the one you'll need to do something about in your own distinctive ways if our democratic societies and democratic freedoms are to survive. Now that you've completed this stage of your university education, the education that equips you to be a citizen of a democracy, you and your generation will have to decide consciously, as my own parents' generation did unconsciously, to invest some portion of your future lives, large or small, as professionals or as volunteers, in the life of your communities and of your country. There are many ways to do this, and they're also connected. Robert Putnam, an American political scientist who studied the role of social capital beginning first in Italy, found that a key indicator for healthy governance was, curiously, the prevalence of choir singing. Communities where people were more willing to go out and join a choir were also communities where they were more willing to go out and exercise their democratic responsibilities. Every kind of civic engagement leads to and nourishes others. The decline of some leads to the neglect of others. The reason that you'll need to build social capital consciously is that there are now so many pressures against it, especially the all-consuming electronic environment in which we're now immersed. As far as I know, scholars have been unable to agree on all the causes of the steady decline of civic engagement since 1961. But one of the culprits that they point to is the rise of new communications technology and media. My generation, for example, was the first to be brought up with television. And while television seemed at first to give promise of connecting citizens and opening up public institutions to greater public involvement, it quickly did the reverse. As people became accustomed to cocooning around their television sets, they began to draw inward, psychologically and even physically inward, away from the porch and the street, and became less and less willing to bestir themselves for community affairs, events, and causes, or even, the scholars tell us, for social forms of recreation. Of course, this trend has been greatly amplified by the arrival of the internet at the end of the 20th century, and now by the new technologies of the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, and the new social media. These technologies and media all have a deeply paradoxical character. On the one hand, they seem to offer, and sometimes do offer, powerful new tools for social engagement, especially within virtual communities. Yet, on the other hand, they often serve in practice to disengage people from their real physical communities, from their families, neighborhoods, cities, and so on. In many concrete ways, they are pulling us apart, isolating each of us within our own virtual spaces. Reinforcing other deep trends in modern life, they encourage us to retreat more and more into our own private worlds and satisfactions, and to neglect our common life and our common good. One of the concepts I've struggled to teach my sons, who I'm very happy are here with me today, is the economist's concept of opportunity cost. Every activity choice has a cost. The cost is the opportunity you forego to do something else. Every minute devoted to your iPhone or to television or to Facebook is a minute subtracted from something else, from reading or conversation or sports or visiting your neighbors or your relatives or choir singing or a charitable or religious organization or a community meeting. That does not mean that the first are good and the second are bad, or the reverse. But the first are so powerful that they can squeeze out the second. They have been squeezing them out more and more every year since 1961. And that's one of the enormous challenges you now face as university graduates ready to take your place in the world as responsible citizens of a parliamentary democracy. Unless they are sustained by a critical mass of genuine citizens, our democracies will not survive. Or they will be democratic in name only. We may be slavishly free, free to acquire, to consume, to buy things, to entertain ourselves, to have Facebook friends, and to gratify our appetites, but we won't be genuinely free members of the polis or enjoy authentic democratic rights, because we will have neglected the prior duties and the democratic communities and institutions on which our rights and freedoms depend. This risk is a greater one than you may think. The continued existence and progress of democracy is by no means a sure thing. The second largest economy in the world today, the place where virtually all our consumer goods are made, is a totalitarian state. So far, a very successful totalitarian state. So successful, in fact, that some in the West have even begun quietly to ask from time to time whether it might be some kind of model for the future. God forbid. But even here in Canada, there are worrying signs that call for a much more informed and vigilant citizenry. Some of our national political leaders now seem willing to use tools of government propaganda that are more reminiscent of authoritarian regimes than they are of a genuine democracy. They seem willing to exploit all the flexibility of an unwritten parliamentary constitution for narrow partisan purposes rather than displaying a wider sense of stewardship for the democratic institutions themselves. There is a radical difference, said the great American political commentator Walter Lippmann, between being a contender for power, a rival among rivals, and the guardian of the order which intends to regulate all the rivalries. Our kind of parliamentary democracy requires political leaders who can be both rivals and guardians, guardians of the democratic institutions within which the rivalry takes place, and who understand the difference. When they have forgotten, we are on a dangerous slope, and the only thing that can save us from a gradual slide toward more authoritarian government is an alert, democratic citizenry who have not forgotten. And that's where you come in. As graduates of Trent University, you've received a higher education intended to make you not just upwardly mobile, self-seeking careerists, but public-spirited citizens of a proud parliamentary democracy. As your fellow graduate today, I allow myself to express the hope that you will take the responsibilities that come with your Trent degree seriously. I hope you will devote some significant portion or portions of your life to your various communities in the many ways that build social capital, the foundation of our common life. I hope you will give yourself to various kinds of public service in the spirit and in the model of Trent's founding president. I hope you will take the time and make the effort to be alert, informed, critical, and responsible voters, citizens, and political actors. Unless you do, you won't pass on to your children the parliamentary democracy you were lucky enough to receive from others, nor the rights and freedoms that go with it. Whatever you do about this, and however you do it, I will always be glad to count myself one of you, a proud fellow graduate of Trent University.